Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very good evening to you, and welcome to this month's Wellington Trust Heritage Lecture, which is a real treat in store. We have, before I introduce tonight's speaker, we have one or two housekeeping notes as usual. Those who have been on so many times before will be well familiar with this, but basically we have the ability to be able to ask questions. And if you would please use the Q&A, the question and answer button, which is the second icon on the bottom of your screens. Fiona Sparks, our trust manager, who is here in the background, will be collecting those questions and will be asking them towards the end of or at the end of the lecture. There will be a recording taken. John Horton, our lecturer this evening, has very kindly agreed that we may record, and this will be available, and the link will be sent to you a few days after this lecture, and also will be posted on our Wellington Trust website for those who might like to go and look at those much later. We are also going to have our usual wash up, as I call it, after the lecture. So at the end of the lecture, do please stay on. If you'd like to. John most kindly has agreed to stay on for a while. He has actually got to go patrolling. I'll tell you what that is in a minute after the lecture. But he has agreed to stay on certainly until 8 o'clock our time this evening. And if I explain that John is actually sitting in or near Vancouver at the moment, the time at the moment I think is around about 10:30 in the morning. Let me come on with no more ado about to tell you about John. John is the most accomplished, and I've got to say celebrated now, artist, particularly in the marine sector. He was born in London, he is an Englishman, and raised and educated in Poole in Dorset. And his first job was working in design for an architectural, for a shop fitting practice in London, an architecture practice. I've got this all wrong. Let me start again. He works for an architectural practice that was doing shop fitting in London. He served for 11 years in the Royal Naval Reserve and the Royal Navy, and memorably was also serving in the First Cod War up in Iceland on patrol in 1958 to 1959. He emigrated to Canada in 1966, working again as an architectural assistant. But he had a passion for the sea, obviously, and this led him to take up sailing and also to continue with his painting of marine subjects. John's work now has been exhibited at the Royal Academy and the Royal Society of Marine Artists in the UK. Gaining a worldwide following led him to be appointed a Canadian war artist in 2002, as you will see from the following slides, when he sailed aboard warships in the Arabian Gulf. Since then, he has produced many important naval commissions along with an ever-expanding variety of marine art. But what about his sailing? Well, in 1988, Fee, if you would please, John and his wife Mary purchased an ex-Royal Canadian Navy Admiral's barge, built in 1944 in Pearl Harbor for the US Navy. We believe that the barge was used by Admiral Nimitz, amongst others. It was converted after the war. John bought it in 1988, and he has since then been part of the Canadian equivalent of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution in terms of patrolling and doing search and rescue for smaller craft, particularly fishing vessels and leisure craft in Canada, in conjunction with, but independently from, the Canadian Coast Guard Service. If I say that he has done nearly, I'm told, he has done nearly 1,000 patrols. That gives a measure of the man. But here are two photos. And if you look very carefully at the bottom photo, you can see John at the helm of the Delta lifeboat. Now, if I may go back one, please. What I now want to mention is the fact in 2022, very recently, John was appointed a member of the Order of British Columbia, which is probably the highest accolade that could be made in Canada these days. Over to you, John, with great pleasure.
Thank you, Alistair, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, depending on where you are. And I believe some people it's very, very early in the morning, but anyway, it's delightful to be with you all and to share my talk with you. I am going to just a minute, I don't seem to have control here.
Click on the screen, John, if that helps.
Click on the screen, John.
Up here. There we go. This is the rough agenda that I'll be following. And one of the things that I will be talking about is the fact that Canada has gone through a number of what I will call war art programs. These are programs that have been established to send artists out into the field, usually in under war conditions, or and sometimes in obviously in peacetime conditions as well, to record what Canada's armed forces have been up to. And so I got first involved in 1978. I was invited to go on a patrol on one, it was actually a fisheries patrol that the Navy was conducting off the west coast of Canada. And so this is one of the paintings that I actually produced from that trip. But this began a long association with the RCN that continues to this very day. The first program that Canada established was during the First World War, 1966, and it was called the War Memorial Fund. Now, this was not a government-funded program. In fact, Lord Beaverbrook was the person who put all the money up to send artists into the war theaters in various parts of the world, but mainly Europe, of course. And he put together a huge collection of war art. And after the war, it actually went on exhibition at the Royal Academy in London. It was hugely acclaimed as a fantastic exhibition. Canada's Group of Seven played a major role in producing this work. Then, as has happened through Canada's history of Canadian war art, at the end of the war, the program was cancelled, and believing that there was no longer a need for it. And so at the beginning of the Second World War, a new program was started, and this was called the Canadian War Records Program of 1942. And again, some very famous artists were sent into the field to record what was going on. Specifically, a lot of it was, from D-Day on. And this particular painting by Orville Fisher, when Fisher was landed on the beaches on the D-Day beaches, he had to let all his painting equipment go, otherwise he would have drowned. And so when he actually landed, he didn't have any art materials with him, and he was literally grabbed some burnt pieces of wood, which of course was charcoal, and odd pieces of paper or cardboard that he could find, and did rough sketches, from which he then produced his final paintings when he got back to England. Excuse me. Which just is a demonstration of how difficult it can be for an artist when he gets out into the field. Alex Colville, another very famous member of the group of seven. This is the painting that he did of troops at Nijmegen in Holland. And so this is just a demonstration of some of the work that was produced by other artists during the Second World War. Now, this is the painting that I produced not that long ago, actually, and it shows C1 and C2, which were Canada's first two submarines. Now, there is a rather interesting story that goes behind this one, which I'd like to relate to you, and that is that in Victoria, British Columbia, which of course is our principal town in BC, there is a very famous gentleman's club known as the Union Club, and these two ships, these two submarines, had been actually commissioned by the Chilean Navy, and they were being built in Seattle, which, for those of you who don't know, is just south of BC here. And the Chileans actually reneged on the purchase of these two vessels. So the shipyard was left with two submarines that it didn't want. And it so happened that the Premier Richard McBride, was having lunch in the Union Club in Victoria on the same day that the owner of the shipyard in Seattle was also having lunch in the Union Club. And McBride overheard the fact that he had two submarines that he'd rather like to get rid of. And McBride thought, and this was literally weeks before the First World War, and McBride said to himself, I think we're heading for a war. In fact, I know we are. And Canada should have those two submarines. Now, it turned out that America could not sell, the US could not sell these submarines to Canada because Canada was what they call a belligerent, and the US was still was a non-belligerent because they weren't going to be involved in the war at that stage. And so anyway, it turned out that McBride actually, behind everybody's back, he made arrangements that BC, not Canada, BC, the province of BC, would buy these two submarines. And nobody else in the BC government knew anything about this. He wrote a check for countless millions of dollars. These two ships were smuggled out of Washington State, sailed up to Victoria. McBride handed over the check, took delivery of these two submarines, and for 2 days, BC had owned it had its own private navy almost. Anyway, 2 days later, the Dominion of Canada purchased them from BC, and they did service during the First World War. Kind of an interesting story. And this painting was actually purchased by the club, which still exists in Victoria, and it hangs in the foyer of the club. Now, I'm going to move now to the beginning of the Second World War, and again, a rather intriguing story, because these C-class destroyers, the four of them, had gone to the Caribbean prior to the Second World War for exercises. And we're talking here about January 1939. And on Good Friday, the April the 7th, 1939, they were on their way back to Esquimalt, and the 4 first lieutenants of the Western Division held a meeting at which it was decided to make certain preparations for war. And war orders were brought up to date. Non-essential gear was landed. Identity discs and gas masks were to be drawn from the dockyard, and any other steps taken that seemed appropriate. And this pre-planning would pay absolute dividends because on Friday morning, the 1st of September, the commanding officers of Fraser and Saint Laurent were sent by Captain D and told that they had to sail for the East Coast. And how long would it take them to get their ships ready? Well, those two ships sailed in 2 hours and 45 minutes after receiving their orders. And the other two ships sailed a couple of days later. And so it's kind of an interesting story, isn't it, about how these first lieutenants had got their ships ready and were able to deploy so rapidly. You may have heard of HMCS Sackville. Sackville was one of the corvettes, of course, which Canada built its navy on. It had a huge fleet of corvettes, and Sackville is, in fact, the last remaining corvette in the world. There are no other ships, and she has been restored and taken back to her Second World War configuration, that is at the end of the war, the way she looked, and she is now a museum ship in Halifax, and she is also a dedicated memorial to the Battle of the Atlantic. And if you are ever in Eastern Canada, would recommend that you step aboard her. It really is a joy to go back in time onto one of these vessels. Now, I'll refer to this painting again a little later on, but this is a watercolor sketch I did of some of our motor gunboats. We had 3 officers, and these are the 3, and I had the privilege of knowing these gentlemen. Regrettably, they've all passed now, but there was Tommy Ladner, Doug Maitland, and Corny Burke. And this photograph was taken of them in Piccadilly during the war. They were the 3 captains on these motor gunboats, and they were sent to the Mediterranean, and there their history is a stuff of great stories of many actions that they conducted against German convoys, and they caused such mayhem there that they were actually dubbed the 3 Musketeers. And so we were delighted to know that they're all from Vancouver. They were school chums. They were members of the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club. They served all through the Navy and came home safely, and continued to in very good positions in industry in Vancouver. And we have their medals. All their medals are actually on display at HMCS Discovery, which is the reserve division here in Vancouver. And we have a very fine naval museum there, and their medals are proudly hung there. And like I said, I had the privilege of knowing these gentlemen. Now, I was moved enough by the story of them that I wanted to do 2 paintings, and this is one of them. And what happened was that these ships were sent to the Mediterranean to back up boost vessels that were already here for the North African landing, and then they continued on into Greece, Italy, Sicily, Yugoslavia, and fought many gallant actions in all of those theaters. This vessel shows them in convoy as they were approaching Gibraltar, and the Duke of York passed them on its way back to Scarborough Flow. And these vessels had literally fought their way from Falmouth all the way down to Gibraltar, being attacked many times by aircraft off the coast of France and Spain. The second painting is, as if you remember that watercolor that I showed you just now, which was the rough sketch before I did this oil painting. And I think one of the signals that they sent was for what we were about to receive prior to attacking in the moonlight one of these German convoys that would be taking supplies up and down the coast of Italy, Greece, and Yugoslavia. And these convoys were often escorted by what they call flak boats, which were very heavily armed, and they were very dangerous vessels to these gunboats. But anyway, they did survive and came home to enjoy the fruits of peace. Now, again, the previous program was cancelled. The Canadian War Records program, which was in the Second World War, was cancelled at the end, and a new program was developed in 1968, which ran through to 95, and it was called the Civilian Art Program. And during that time, artists would be sent away, usually on training missions that the Navy or obviously the Air Force and the Army as well. But you know, my main thrust has been with the Navy. So anyway, this painting is one that was done during the first war that out in Kuwait, and this painting was actually done by a colleague of mine, Bob McVitie. Bob McVitie was another well-known marine artist from this area. Unfortunately, he has since passed away. But this is a salute to my friend Bob. And then in 95, as I say, the Civilian Art Program was cancelled, and the next program started in 2001. And actually, I was the first artist to go to be employed in that program, and to be actually sent into a theater of war. And this was the Second Gulf War, which of course was the war on terror. It was when Al-Qaeda after they'd attacked the towers. And so we had two missions, and Canada was a leader in this with its Navy. The first one was to ensure that members of Al-Qaeda would not be escaping by sea. And the second one was the oil embargoes that were being placed in place to make sure that oil was not being smuggled. And this shows the ship, the Algonquin that I was on, and we are doing an interdiction, that is a search of an Arab dhow. And this would be done by sending the rubber boat over with an armed crew on board, who would go on board and search the vessel for illegal cargo or members of Al-Qaeda who might be trying to escape by sea. Of course, in the Gulf there, for any mariners of you that have served in the Gulf, sailed in the Gulf, you will remember that the sand blows off the desert there, and we get this wonderful effect, and the colors of the sun coming through the sand. It does give you some wonderful effects, which for an artist, of course, are absolute magic. And so this shows a typical interdiction happening with this Arab dhow. This is just a quick summary of what Apollo was all about. And that top photograph is the ship that I was on. The ship behind it is actually a Netherlands vessel, because this was a NATO operation. There were ships from, I think, 13, 14 navies when I was there, all participating in the same job. Now, Canada actually wrote the book on how to do an interdiction, And that book is closely followed by all NATO navies when they're doing interdictions on ships. And so the bottom photograph shows you the party that will be going out in the rib to do that interdiction. When I was sent out there, I was told to bring light clothing, and having been in the RN, when you're in the tropics, what do you wear? You wear white, well, Canadians wear black for some strange, weird and wonderful reason. And so I was actually able to go away on some of these interdictions. And so I had white overalls on, and so I told them that I would be the duty target for the day. So but they did eventually change the uniforms to lighter colors, because of course in the heat of the sun, these guys were really suffering. And when it was interesting that when we came back to the ship's doctor was standing at the bottom of the companionway, and he stuck a thermometer in my mouth, and then he stuck it in the mouth of a fellow in black behind me to compare our body temperatures, which was kind of an interesting thing. This shows you the quick map of the area. I flew out to Dubai, drove across the desert to Al-Fajura, which is a major oil port, and there were literally hundreds of oil tankers at anchor off Al-Fajura. Now, we were, our main patrol area was the Gulf of Oman, and there were vessels that we call go-fast. These are open boats that take migrant workers from Iran and Pakistan across to Oman to work. And this was seen as being a possible route for Al-Qaeda to be escaping. And so that was why we were doing all this patrol work in the area. This shows an actual interdiction going on, and the Sudani line ships were actually known to be friendly with Al-Qaeda, and they would actually even weld up steel doors and hatches to try and slow down any progress that our party was trying to make through the ship. And so it could get a bit tricky. You never knew there wasn't a fellow up there on the upper deck or the bridge that might lob a grenade down on top of you. I mean, the possibility was really there. And so what we did is we used to have the helicopter would fly over and do a sort of overview of the upper deck to make sure that they were complying with any instructions that we were passing, and that there was nobody there doing anything that might endanger our crews. And when the all clear was given from that, then the rubber boat would land its crew, and they would go up on board and do their inspection. In the meantime, the ship would be circling. So you've got the helicopter up there, you've got the rubber boat, and you've got the ship, all in different positions. And of course, if you're on that ship, your attention is divided amongst all these things. So it just helped to make it a little bit safer. So this shows me in the Gulf doing rough sketches. Of course, it's when you're on a moving ship, it's not easy to do. You can't just sit there and do a finished painting. And so I did a lot of sketches, and then when I came back, I got involved in the studio to put it all together as finished paintings. But you might remember that the USS Cole got heavily damaged by Al-Qaeda when they rammed it with a boat full of explosives, and so we were very cautious of any boats that were anywhere near us, that the same thing could have happened to us. And you can just see the fellow that's standing behind me there. You can just see the tip of a gun that he's got over his shoulder. And so we were, everywhere I went around the upper deck, there was an armed guard behind me, just to make sure that nothing happened in case, the possibility was there. And so here we are coming up on two of these go-fasts full of these migrant workers. They all had a plastic work permit, and we had to investigate every single one of those. We had to look at every single one of those. So this would take up to 2 hours to do one of these interdictions in this blazing sun, and at the end of it, we would hand over bags of fresh water for them, because these poor guys were really suffering in the heat. But we had to look right down into the bottom. In fact, there was on one day I was on board, and it just so happened I was one of the closest people to a fellow who looked like he was hiding in the bottom of the boat, and they asked me to take a photograph of him, which I did. But it turned out that he was suffering from heat exhaustion and was trying to get out of the sun. But who knew? You know, he could have been a member of Al Qaeda. And so this was a large part of what we were doing out there, was investigating all these go-fasts. And they're called go-fast because they have up to 3, sometimes even 4 huge outboard engines on the back of them, and they really do go fast. So sometimes we'd have to chase them with the helicopter to slow them down. Now, when I went out to the Gulf, I kept saying to myself, how the hell do you paint modern warfare? You know, it's not like it was in our younger days when, you know, guns were blazing and torpedoes were firing, and there were crews behind all over the upper deck, manning all the guns, and the bridge was crowded with the upper deck crew there. And but that's not the way it is today. This is where, down in the operations room, this is where the ship is fought from. And the figure at the back with his finger pointing, that's the captain. He's not up on the bridge. He's down in the operations room. And so all the guns, the torpedoes, the missiles, everything like that, the defense systems, it's all controlled and fought from down here. Very, very different. So where's modern warfare fought? Well, this is it. And of course, our Sea-King helicopters play a major part. They're all gone now, but these woolly birds were actually built before the men that were flying them were born. That's how old they were. And they've done sterling service. As I say, they're all gone now. But I had to paint one of these because they played such a major role in the whole operation. And you might say, well, how the hell did you get that shot, John? Well, actually, I didn't. I actually went into the hangar when I got back here over in Victoria to the airfield where they keep them all, and I actually went up on the ladder and sketched the helicopter and sitting on the ladder, and it was sitting on the ground, and then, you know, put it together into the painting. This one, of course, you've seen before, and I've already told you all about that one. And this one is typical. This is Algonquin. You can see the 2 helicopter hangars there in the stern, and we are in the moonlight, and we are following a ship of interest, which at dawn we would probably ask to stop and to do an interdiction on. So this was just again another painting showing what life is like at sea. And again, that band across the horizon, of course, is the sand. Again, coming off the desert. In 2004, I was invited to go on RIMPAC, still as a member of the Canadian Forces Artist Program, and that is Algonquin alongside there. I'm actually on the tanker, and she's coming alongside to do a replenishment at sea. And I'm just taking photographs of the operation. While I was on board, I was privileged actually to have the senior, well, it's the Admiral's cabin actually on Protector, which is right under the bridge there, and I managed to turn it into an artist studio. So I was, while I was on board for 5 weeks of Hawaii, in the Hawaiian Islands. RIMPAC is a major exercise that happens every 2 years and involves a large number of NATO nations, including the Royal Navy. They come and get involved sometimes. And we play war games, fire missiles and guns and everything else, and learn to work together, communicate together, and all the things that go towards making an efficient, cohesive one Navy, if you like. If things got bad at any time, when all these NATO nations have to come together, you've all got to be able to talk the same language, and this exercise is basically to do that and to build the alliances. In fact, interestingly enough, when you're in Pearl Harbor, prior to the exercise, they have cocktail parties on all the different ships every night in the week prior to. And I remember an American admiral telling me, he said, "John, this is the most important part of RIMPAC, because these cocktail parties are where the alliances are built," which I thought was a rather interesting comment. Anyway, this shows Protector and Algonquin preparing to do a RAS. This is a fast watercolor that I would have done on board from material that I gathered. I also went on to ships of other nations, and here I am. I'm actually on the USS Howard, and that is the US Lake Champlain in the background, the cruiser. And I show you these two together because what I decided to do for finished painting was to take these two paintings, put them together, and produce this one. And so that's how the basis for this painting. So that's Protector, Lake Champlain, and the Howard, all preparing or finishing, having done a replenishment at sea. And I also did some paintings of fellows, people doing work around ships, and this shows them flaking down lines prior to doing a replenishment at sea, repairing all the lines that would be fired across, so that the jackstay and the oil lines can be hauled across. And this is a finished painting I did of the RAS crew flaking down the lines. After RIMPAC, like I said, that was a 5-week deployment, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It's just great to see our sailors working with such efficiency. I have to say, I was on the American ships, and I have to say quietly, perhaps, that I didn't see the efficiency on board those vessels that I saw on the Canadian ones. It was really, really uplifting. As you know, we bought 4 submarines from the British, and I had the privilege of going to sea on HMCS Windsor, and this is a photograph of me at the main periscope, and I was out in the Atlantic diving on her, and after that trip I did this painting of HMCS Windsor. 4 days after I was on the Windsor, they had the Chicoutimi accident. HMCS Chicoutimi was on delivery from the UK, and she suffered an accident where water went down the hatches, and they got chlorine gas inside the ship, and one officer died from gas poisoning. It was a tragic accident, and should not have happened, but it did. And when this painting sold, they actually had a trust fund that they set up for the family, and I donated some of the money from the sale of this painting to that trust fund. The 100th anniversary in 2010, prior to it, we had a meeting with the then senior admiral in Ottawa, and he said, "John, we've got the anniversary, big anniversary, 100th anniversary of the Navy coming up, and we're looking for ideas of things we can do to help celebrate. So I said, well, maybe what you should be doing is commissioning some paintings to record the history of the Canadian Navy. And I said, right there, I said, and right here, I'll say, you know, I'm not saying that I want you to commission me to do them. In fact, I said, what I think you should do is to put out an artist call across Canada, and that will involve a lot of artists all across the nation to come up with ideas that you could then commission to as finished paintings. And so that's what they did. And I produced some 25 watercolors for that. And this is one of the watercolors that I produced. And it showed Halifax during the war, and it showed many of the types of vessels that were in fact involved in the Battle of the Atlantic. They actually ended up choosing this as one of the paintings they wanted, and this was the finished painting. In it, in the background, of course, you can see merchant ships forming up as a convoy going out. That's a salute to them. We've got minesweepers. We've got some British ships on a cruiser and some destroyers at the right-hand end under the crane. We've got the force stackers that the U.S. Navy gave on a lease lend basis to both the Royal Navy and the Canadian Navy. And then we've got corvettes, we've got Fairmile MLs, and we've got the submarine. So we've got a pretty good cross section there of vessels that would have been involved in the Battle of the Atlantic. Next painting one of the other ones that I did was this one, which was to show the Canadian Navy after the war. This actually shows HMS Warrior, which I served on when it went, because it was on loan to the Canadian Navy for a while. When it went back into the RN, I served on there. I was actually Admiral Hicks's, Commodore Hicks's coxswain, and drove the Commodore's barge on the Warrior. But they said, no, we don't want the Warrior, we want the Magnificent. So they wanted me to do this painting, but they wanted to show the Magnificent, which was the next aircraft carrier that they got from Britain. And it shows also the Tribal class destroyers, which did such valiant service in the RCN. So this, in fact, is the finished painting. Shows Magnificent, which was actually 6 feet longer than Warrior, but very much the same. Interestingly enough, Warrior was before I got on her, she had been the trials carrier for angled deck, mirror deck landing aid, and steam catapult. She was the first carrier in the world to have all three of those British inventions on it. And it was interesting. I was on one of the big American nuclear carriers once, and I said, oh, it's nice to see you've got some good British inventions on here. And the guy bristled and said, oh, no, those are invented by the Americans. So anyway, I gently put into rights on that one. So anyway, this was the finished painting of that one. So this was 2 of 6 paintings that they actually commissioned, and I ended up actually being commissioned to do 3 of them. And the third one was they wanted another one of Apollo, and but when we actually did the finished painting, we changed it somewhat, and this was actually the finished painting. And there was a technical reason why we swapped it all over, and the reason was that the rib is launched on the starboard side of the frigate, and so by keeping the frigate on the starboard side of the vessel of interest, it gave you just that little bit more time, because the the vessel of interest could not see you physically launching the rib. It just gave them that little bit of extra warning. But here you can see the helicopter overhead, looking down on the upper deck of this tanker to make sure that it is safe before the rib is called alongside to go and do their inspection. And so, I think this is we're getting close to the end here. This is the motor vessel Asterisk. Now, Canada's two surviving tankers were the Protector and the Protector and Provider, and they were over 45 years. I think they were 45 years old. Single hull tankers, not allowed to go into certain ports in the world. Obviously, way past their time. They were steamers, and the Canadian government had reneged for so many years to provide replacements for these ships, and it became crucial. These two steamers were taken out of service, and the Canadian Navy was being fueled at sea by other nations. We could not fuel our own ships anymore. Everybody from Chile, Spain, the US, Britain, you name it, all these other nations were fueling our ships. And so Davis Shipyard came up with the idea that while two more ships were being ordered, that they could take a container ship, a modern container ship, which was only, I think, 12, 15 years old. They stripped it out. It was a hull and an engine, and that's all they left. And then they reconfigured it as an AOR, as an auxiliary oil replenishment vessel. And they did a brilliant job. It was built under budget and ahead of schedule. And this vessel is now sailing the oceans of the world, refueling NATO ships as well as our own. And she's proven to be a very, very good ship. The two replacement ships are not even in the water yet. In fact, one, they've only just started cutting steel for it. The other one, I think it might be launched this coming year in 23. If not 23, it'll be 24. And so this has taken a long time to do. So this is the painting that I was commissioned to do for Davis Shipyard, and they gave it as a gift to the RCN as a gift of appreciation for, I guess, for the contract. And they actually wanted to do a second ship, and the Canadian government said, no, we're not doing it. So they're building ships right now, which are costing probably twice as much as what it cost to do Asterisk. But that's governments for you. And so this shows actually my latest painting, which is the Harry de Wolf. They've built, Urban Shipyard have built and are still building 6 of these Arctic patrol vessels. And this is me starting the paint. I actually sailed on it last year. And here she is coming, she was making her first transit through the Arctic. And this is the first Canadian naval ship to go through the Arctic from east to west since the 1950s. And so these ships have been built to try and say and restore sovereignty rights in the Arctic. They're building 6 of these for the Navy, and they're building another 2 for the Coast Guard. So it's a total contract of 8. And this is the finished painting, which I call Guardians of the North. So interesting ships. They are lightly armed. I don't know quite what but their main, I guess their main role is going to be just having a presence, obviously, but they're obviously not heavily armed in case if there was ever a conflict up there. But they are icebreakers. They can operate in first year ice, and the second ship went through the Arctic this year, and the third one will be going through this coming year, and will be based on the West Coast. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is my presentation.
Which was superb, John. Thank you very much indeed. What a rich tapestry. And I was thinking, as you know, I sat in on your RCN lecture a good number of months ago, which is why I wanted you to come and talk to us. And I'm so grateful for that, really am, beyond words. But I think as I was thinking through what you were saying and what I saw, I thought how privileged we are to have this lecture now on our website, where we can refer to it at any time and see your art. It's your art which particularly appeals, and that part of it is the interpretation of the seas, the light of the sea, the transparency of the sea, the floating remnants of ice in the Arctic scenes, the nighttime capture of the sea. I just don't know how you capture sea. I won't ask you to explain, because it's within your mind and your skill, but that's what brings it to life. And the light in those paintings, it's just something else. Not only that, but also your technical grasp. The capture of the RAS team flaking out the lines. Gosh, do I remember that happening? But actually, I was looking at the way you caught everything in the background, just exactly all the vents and the extracts and the rails and the nature of the deck. You just caught the whole thing. You just capture it. You understand it. I've got one question for you, and that is, you served in this ship in the first Cold War. You probably would have been as sick as a parrot as everybody else would have been on that, so you haven't got time for art. But if you could put yourself back, it is one of these old questions, if you could put yourself back on board HMS, oh gosh, I can't remember. Thank you very much.
Wave.
Wave, indeed. If you can put yourself back on board HMS Wave, how would you have interpreted what you did and what you saw up in the late 50s, up off Iceland? And could you still do it now?
Yeah, I guess. That's a tricky question. I don't know. I mean, you know, the bad weather. Obviously, one remembers. I remember the large fishing vessels, of course, the big British trawlers that were up there. I also remember the danger that they faced. I mean, we were, as I told you before, we were the floating hospital and engineering shop.
Yeah.
And a lot of the dangers that we saw, I guess that's what I'd be trying to convey.
Yeah.
Going to the assistance of a vessel that was in trouble, and because we came up with some pretty unique methods of being able to even get aboard these vessels, in bad weather. And I think there's some systems that are still being used to this day, but we developed them then,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, if anyone ever writes a history of the Cod Wars, I hope yours will be the cover.
Thank you.
I'll talk about
It'd
it
be an
later.
interesting book, actually. I think.
It certainly would be. I mean,
there you go, Alistair. Write a book.
Well, sorry, it was a slight challenge that came that direction from another time, but I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you. But I do seriously think, I mean, there was so little, there was film evidence, obviously, of what happened in those wars. But in the first war, the first Cold War in 58, 59, certainly very little documentary evidence, but you've got your memory, you've got your skill, And I just think that's something that maybe is a bit of a challenge for you, to bring back to life what you remember and how you remembered it. Albeit disaster at sea or these things that happen anywhere in the world, but that was that particular period.
Yes.
Anyway, I go on about that. The great thing is we have 4 questions for you. And if I may, I'm going to ask Fiona just to come up with those.
Sorry about that. Yes. Thank you, John. I did have to look a few times to see if it was paintings or photographs. They were so good.
Oh, absolutely.
So the first question is from Alan O'Neill, and he asks, when you were creating your sketches while on board ships, did you take photos to remember colours in the scene?
Of course, because everything is moving around so fast, I'm afraid, yes, we do take an awful lot of photographs. It's not that you're copying the photograph; you're using it as a more as a quick sketch pad, so that you know, you've got to make sure that the funnel is in the right place and it does have the right number of guns and things like that. But you can't stand there and literally sketch every detail. There's something you're going to miss, and if you do miss something, somebody's going to jolly well tell you about it. If you've got, if you've got, you know, I always remember actually years ago, I was having lunch with a gentleman who had a wonderful a painting of Dawson's hanging on his boardroom wall, and he said, you know, that Dawson, he said, he sure knew his ships. He said, you know, there is a one halyard going through the wrong block. And I thought, my God, I took that as a lesson right there and then. God, you know, and because that's the way it is. If you know, you have a halyard going through a wrong block, somebody's going to tell you about it.
And we'll know about it.
Fantastic. Okay, the next question is from Charles Hattersley, and he asks, it's really interesting. The Canadian Navy has always been very underrated. Do you ever spend painting time underwater with the submarine service? Thought you may have a few sketches of the exhaustion of sailors after a 90-day patrol.
I've actually, you know, I've been on everything from the Vanguard down to Fairmile MLs, but I had never been on a submarine until I was invited aboard Windsor. And so I was out there. It was basically a day sail out into the Atlantic, dive and all that sort of thing, you know. And so that's really my only experience on the submarine. So I must admit that I haven't got a whole lot of information in submarines to paint, but it was a unique experience. I was very pleased to be able to do it.
Okay, the next question from Stan Bowles. I see you used a Tokyo Marine chemical tanker. Do you remember which one? He's the former GM of that company.
I'm sorry, you'll have to say that again. I didn't get it.
Okay, so Stan Bowles has asked, I see you used a Tokyo Marine chemical tanker. Do you remember which one? He's the former GM of that company.
Which painting, V?
Which painting?
He doesn't actually say which painting. Sorry.
I didn't.
A tanker. There's a
If
tanker.
Stan
in
is
one of
still
the
on.
Oh,
paintings.
the tanker.
There's a tanker in one of the paintings.
Oh, it's the tanker that's.
Yes, the
Yes,
Tokyo
it's-
Marine chemical tanker.
Yes. No, I honestly don't remember. I'm sorry. I can't tell you which tanker it was.
Is it for sale, John? Because you've got a buyer on the call.
Actually, we can do copies of it, but yeah, we actually had a very cute story from when I came back from the Gulf War. We were invited to go to the American consul,
They were friends of ours.
and who were friends of ours, and they had Salucci, who was the American ambassador in Ottawa, was visiting, and he wanted me to show him the paintings I had done from Operation Apollo, which at that time I still had. They hadn't gone to Ottawa yet, and so the Salucci's looking at these, and they said, "Well, we'd like to buy that one." They said that's the first painting that we husband and wife. It's the first painting we have both agreed on that we'd like to have hanging in our house. And I had to say, I'm awfully sorry, but it's not for sale. It's got to go to Ottawa.
I see Stan has actually come back and said it's the orange one.
The orange one.
The orange one, yes,
Yes,
yeah. No, I'm sorry. It's actually, if you want to know the honest truth, that was a tanker that was in Vancouver Harbor, and I used it in the painting. It's called artist license, I think.
Which you're allowed.
Yeah, sure.
Stephen Taylor, who is one of the Wellington Trust ambassadors, has said
And a past chairman of the
and a
Wellington
past
Trust.
chairman.
Yes.
The Royal Canadian Navy was the saviour for our Atlantic convoys, which Wellington undertook. Do you have any World War II convoy paintings with British and Canadian ships?
I have done convoy paintings, yes, and there are none actually in my presentation, but yes, I have done.
We've got one of Sackville,
But
she's
yeah.
not in the presentation.
Yes, not in the yes, yeah. No, I have done some convoy paintings, but there was that one of the Sackvillas that we showed you is the closest one.
She's a beautiful ship. We've been researching Sackville, finding out about Sackville for the Wellington Trust. We're trying to establish which other ships of that era, the Second World War, are still up and floating throughout the world, and we've got quite a list at the moment.
Haida?
Sackville is high on the.
Yeah, Haida
Haida
is the other. Yeah,
Haida as well, of course. Yeah, she's in Halifax. I think, is she Halifax?
No, Haida is in
Ontario.
It's in Ontario. Wasn't Toronto, but I think they moved it somewhere else.
Oh, right, indeed. Okay.
And she is now the ceremonial flagship of the Canadian Navy.
Oh, good heavens, well.
Yeah.
Great,
of course,
great.
Never goes to sea, of course. Like victory, you know.
Yeah, great use for her. Great use. Fee,
Yes.
Are we there? Do you think actually if we transfer across now to the workshop, we do one or two more questions there, or
Yeah,
whatever?
absolutely.
I don't know how many there are still left.
There's some very interesting. There was one here that I will just read out from John
We'll make
and
it the last one
Francine.
for this part of the lecture.
Yeah, be very quick. John and Francine Blake. I will tell Tim Lewin, son of Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Lewin, and
Very
who
good.
is a vice chairman of HMS Belfast Association, of your talk, as he has organised a ceremony on board in December to commemorate the Canadian naval involvement in sinking of the, excuse my pronunciation, Scharnhorst in 1944.
The Scharnhorst.
Yep. To which the Canadian Navy Embassy will be invited.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
There you go.
Wonderful.
We'll make sure we put Johnny Blake in touch with you, John.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Now, let us
Right.
have a pause on this, and if you can, Fee, quickly. And by the way,
Yes.
people might ask where Jenny Mosley is at the moment. The answer is she's somewhere in a rather nice village up the top of a hill in Spain.
In Spain.
Which is why
Yes.
she's not in Spain.
Sunning herself.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be very quick. So our next lecture will be slightly different, as it's actually going to be on board HQS Wellington. It's a paid-for event, and the presentation is by David Parry, who is going to tell the Perisher story, which is the submarine training course for naval officers preparing to take command of a submarine. We will be sending details, but for our overseas visitors, don't worry, David will actually be doing the lecture online as well in December. It will be the 12th of December. It is a paid event, as I said, and we will be sending information on how you can book and pay for the event. We're offering a buffet supper, or you can just attend the lecture if you don't fancy eating on board. But that's happening at the end of October, and then we will be giving you information on the November lecture a little bit later.
Very good. Thank you, Fee. Now, let us, John, I thank you again enormously at this stage for the most fantastic lecture.
My pleasure.
I mentioned at the top of the evening that you were going out on patrol, but people will now know you're going to be out on patrol in the Delta Lifeboat. You want to tell us a little bit more about what your patrols involve?
Well, it's being a holiday weekend. There are quite a number of recreational vessels that have gone out over the weekend. Will be coming back. We have 25 miles across the Gulf of Georgia, and they go across to the Gulf Islands for the weekend, and they'll be coming back. And so we're going over to make sure they all get home safely. We also conduct patrols during fisheries. The Fraser River is a major salmon river, and we can have a large number of fishing vessels out. And we've got deep sea ships, rail ferries, tugs and barges, all that sort of thing, going up and down through this narrow channel. And if it's plugged by fishing nets, obviously you can have problems. And so what we do is we go ahead of as much commercial traffic as possible to make sure the nets are clear. And if for any reason they're not, then we will do whatever it takes to get them out of the way. Because especially if a ship is coming downstream, you've got a deep sea ship, a 1,000-foot container ship, he can't stop. And I've actually got a photograph of a large merchant ship with 11 nets around his bow going down the river. So this is highly dangerous. Fishing vessels have been run over, people have been killed, fishermen have been killed, and so we're there to firstly to try and stop the accident from happening, and secondly, if it does happen, then we go in and resolve it. We've actually done almost 1,000 rescues in this boat over the years.
That's a phenomenal record. It really is. And bravo Zulu.
Thank you.
We're now moving across into the informal stage. John, you're very kindly staying. You can stay on for a few minutes, but you've got to get something to eat before you go out on patrol. But to drop off whenever you like. But here we are. This is the team coming in. Those who stay over. It takes a little while to come on because of the technical process. But, they'll soon be in. And I would ask everybody, if they want to and they've got the bandwidth, would they like to turn on their screens as well? It's good to see some of the old names there. Richard Shuttleworth, great to see you. And Holly, nice to see you again there.
Hi, Alistair, John.
Hi,
thank you, John, for your fabulous presentation. And it couldn't come at a better time because today is Thanksgiving in Canada.
Absolutely.
Wait,
we had a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner last night.
What did I do wrong here? We're not seeing my face here. I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
No, that's right. Your face will come up when you turn it on, Holly. There it is. Both watchers of Blake. John, it's lovely to see you. And David, down in Cape Town. Are you there? Yes, you are. You're top line. I'll see you for looking.
He's there.
Great to see you. And my golly, we've got some good people. Michael Draper, Scott, over there. You're across the other side of the pond from us, I guess, are you? Is that right? Michael?
Yeah, I'm from actually Whitehorse, Yukon. So north
Yay!
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Congrats on the Agamemnon. She's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I finished her a week and a half ago, and yeah, that was 12 years in the making.
Fantastic. We have John, let me explain, John Horton, let me explain that we had a lecture from Simon Stevens. In fact, we've had two, who was the curator of small vessels at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. And I think we had an enormous contingent of particularly US-based model makers came on. And the great thing is, you dear guys are still here coming to our lectures. I think, Michael, you're one of those. Is that right?
Yep, you bet. Yeah, I won't miss it. If I'm around, I'm definitely online. So
It's
yeah.
absolutely great. It's great to have you on board. It
And
really-
Mort as well. Mort always comes.
Yep, indeed. Always one. Holly, where are you? Holly, you're
Right
can you
here.
explain- Just can you explain to John where you are? So, because you're just down the road from it, aren't you? In Canadian
Oh,
Mile.
I live in Wisconsin. I live in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That is southeast Wisconsin. And
Yeah.
my apartment building faces Lake Michigan and the marina and all of the boats.
There we are.
And I am a sucker for water.
You are. And you're a sucker for these lectures, which is terrific. The way
I
you do
love
it every
these
month.
lectures. I love these lectures. And you know, John, I want to tell you, your paintings actually look like photographs. They are so real.
They do.
They're so real.
They do indeed. Fantastic. But oh, it's great to see everyone here. Stephen, good to see you. At least I can see your photo.
Yeah, I don't know. I never seem to be able to get the picture onto the screen at home.
Well, that's right. We know that's what you looked like a couple of
I
years
saw
ago.
you.
I don't know where the thing goes wrong.
Yeah, sure.
But that was
You're there.
fascinating talk, and certainly to catch up a bit on some of the old memories in out in the Gulf, with the go fasts and the boardings, etc. It's good to
When
have.
were you out there, Stephen?
Hmm?
When were you out in the Gulf?
Was
that after Gulf?
a couple of times, Manchester and Southampton.
All right.
In the Operation Apollo, our Miller,
All right.
which was in the last century.
Yeah. But certainly after Gulf 1 and Gulf 2, I presume. Yeah. And thank you for that. Richard, good to see you. Richard Shuttleworth, sir. Time we had another lecture from you. What are you going to talk about next time?
I think I'll have to get something together for you then.
We can have Taranto too.
Tranto too.
Exactly. That'd be great. We want to
Have
have
a
something
ride and a
about your,
swordfish. Want to go for a ride and a swordfish first?
well, have you ever flown a stringback?
No, I'm not quite that old, but
There must be one that can get off the ground somewhere in the world.
they're just getting the rear seat of one of them certified by the CAA because they're now on the civil register, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
And health and safety have said they're not safe enough, yet they were flying most of the way through the war in exactly the same conditions. So I don't know why the CAA have to get involved.
Well, they actually had a torpedo behind them as well. So the observer, was it the pilot in the back seat? I presume it was.
No, pilot in the front and
Pilot in the front, the observer in the back,
observer in the middle and a telegraphist air gunner in the rear seat.
sitting over a torpedo somewhere.
Well, it's underneath all of them,
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
between the wheels,
Yeah. Exactly.
18-inch.
Yes. Oh gosh, one didn't think about it in those days, probably. One
No.
day. Yeah. Lee Washburn, good evening to you. Good for you to join. Are you over the other side of the pond? I presume you are. Yeah. Whereabouts are you, Lee?
San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, fantastic.
Wow.
Write that down, will you, Fee? We got to check where these chaps are. We know where you live now, Lee. That's good. And you're a model maker as well, I presume.
Yes, I am. Quite a
What do you-
number of models and represented in museums, etc.
What's been one of your latest projects, Lee? Can you tell us about it?
Actually, my latest project was a four-stacker, flush deck destroyer, basically scratch built. But I did it in memory of the USS Pope, which upon reading the history of it in World War II, I could not imagine that it had not been represented by somebody else, with having the captain receiving the Navy Cross, the executive officer, the Medal of Honor, and the ship, the Presidential Unit Citation, and being blown up one Sunday morning in the Java Strait by a Japanese aircraft carrier, I think 3 or 4 cruisers, 6 destroyers, and all that air arm in that little four-stacker. So I wanted to memorialize it.
That's incredible. That was just after the occupation of Singapore, I presume, was it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. I met a man who was sunk twice in 6 days. He was, first of all, in the Prince of Wales, although obviously she sank more slowly than the Repulse, but both hit by Japanese aircraft, I think. And he lost the Prince of Wales. He was brought back into Singapore. They were way out east of Singapore. And then with the Japanese coming closer and ever closer, they were re-embarked into a carrier. Alas, I can't remember which carrier, but I met this chap at the funeral of an Admiral James Harkness, who was my wife's godfather. And they were both out, and they were down in the Java Straits, and they were sunk and captured. So that was 6 days later.
I would make a comment that some people were reviewing this. I'm sure some of the audience here now knows exactly what a four stacker is. And somebody looked at the model and pointed to this object on the deck on the port side and said, well, what is that? And I said, well, that's the refrigerator. It was mounted on the port side right up against it, just as far as you get the edge. And I could imagine a shot by any gun would have taken out that refrigerator faster than anything else on the entire ship.
That would have caused mutiny before death. Would the this model you've made, Lee, who have you made it for?
It will most likely it would be going up to the National Museum of the Pacific War, which is in Fredericksburg, Texas, sometimes referred to as the Admiral Nimitz. I already have one ship up there, and this will be going up to June. I just think the ship needs to be remembered. It was such a gallant ship. It was one of those ones that was built in 1920. It was late for the World War I, but after being built, it immediately went to the China Station and stayed over there until that morning in, I believe, March 1942.
I'm going to look her up. I've written this down. Thank you very much for that, Lee.
Alistair, you might remember that in that painting I showed you of Halifax, there were, I think, 2 or 3 four stackers tied up.
Oh, really?
Tied up a beam of each other because they played a major part in the Battle of the Atlantic. Some of them.
That's fantastic.
And, they filled in when there was a real lack of ships. So thank you to the States for those.
It's on.
That I'm going to look up. I've got four stacker and USS Pope. That's my research for tomorrow, to look up these things. Great way of learning. I'm very privileged.
I also remember them being tied up in Poole Harbor, funnily enough. When I was a kid,
good heavens above.
There were several of them that used to come in and out of Poole Harbor. I think probably prior to D-Day.
Sure. Now there's a story, isn't there, John Horton? There's a story. That painting of yours, the 100th anniversary painting you did of HX. Wasn't there something about Mary, your wife, and one of the vessels there in the painting? Or have I blown something I shouldn't have talked about?
The ferry that goes across to Dartmouth.
Yeah.
She was almost born on it.
Oh, well, there we are. Thank you for that happy note. Scott, you're over in the States as well, or have I got that wrong?
I'm in Wisconsin. I'm on the other side of the state from Holly.
From Holly.
Where are you?
I'm in La Crosse, so I can't look at the ocean or at the big lake. I can look at the river.
You got the Mississippi River.
Yeah, I got the Mississippi
The mighty
River.
Mississippi.
Now, John, I was aboard the Abraham Lincoln, and I got to visit her, and the officer there knew who invented the catapult, so the steam catapult. So I guess my people were more informed than yours, but I think it'd be fascinating just to sit down with you and listen to all the stories that I'll bet you can tell about all of your experiences beyond. I mean, the paintings are fascinating.
One thing ever.
Thank you. Thank you.
Scott, thank you for the prompt, because there's something I was going to ask John. I've forgotten, John Horton, and that is what was flying off? What was flying off the carrier? Was that a Mustang?
Okay, on Warrior?
Yeah, on Warrior.
Okay, we had Avengers.
Oh, Avengers.
We had a
Yeah.
ship's flight of Avengers, and we had oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the helicopters now. The British helicopters, but
Well,
of course we went to the Pacific exploding hydrogen bombs, and so we didn't need particularly fast aircraft because some of them were going to be flying through the cloud to pick up collect air samples, stuff like that.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Whirlwind.
Whirlwinds. Thank you. I said school.
Was it Whirlwinds?
Yes,
Before-
Whirlwind. Yeah. Western Wyverns.
On the Wyvern before the
Western
Whirlwind. Yes.
Wyvern,
Yeah.
Whirlwinds used to drop out of the sky rather too often, I think, Stephen, didn't they? As I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah. They weren't that reliable. But it's lovely you got that painting of the Sea King. I mean, they were the stuff when we were around, Stephen, weren't we? Sea Kings.
Yes. After the Whirlwind.
Yeah. And then the Wessexes, 1, 3, and 5.
And the Wessexes came. Yeah, they came before the Sea Kings.
Yeah,
didn't
sure.
they? Yes.
Yeah. Richard, you were. I'm ashamed to say this. You were fixed wing or helo pilot, Richard Shuttleworth?
No, helicopters. I
You were
started on a Hilo
Jungly.
and then went on to the
Yes.
onto the Whirlwind 7.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was I being disparaging about them, saying they fell out of the sky?
The Wessex 5s didn't because they had 2 engines, but the other ones did.
Yeah.
You had Whirlwinds in Borneo, didn't you, Richard?
My elder brother was in Borneo. I wasn't actually a pilot then. I was in a minesweeper.
But we had Whirlwinds there, didn't we?
Yes, you did. But you would have had
848.
the Wessex 5 and the Wessex 3 probably were or Wessex 1.
Yeah.
The Wessex 3 was the anti-submarine one. But I mean, whoever designs a helicopter, an aircraft with 1 engine to hover over the sea, why not have 2?
Asking for trouble. There it is. John Blake. Johnny, thank you very much for the heads up on the RCN. And would you make that contact with John Horton? Just to you're on mute, sorry, at the moment. I suddenly seen. Well, bottom left-hand button.
How's that?
That's great. We got you loud.
Yeah. I can email Tim, who's very
Yep.
kindly invited us on board for this ceremony in
Yeah.
December.
Yeah.
And get the email for John off you, Alistair.
Yes,
And
indeed.
introduce Tim. I'm sure he would like to know. And I wish I thought earlier to tell him about this talk. My wife is French Canadian, Francine, yeah, and she's very much, haven't you? You've enjoyed the talk immensely and admired your skill, John Horton.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely fantastic.
Very kind.
Thank you so much, John, and Francine as well.
I just say hello to my brother David in Cape Town and my sister Angela in Oxfordshire. Hi. We won't soak up the airwaves anymore.
No, that's most of the family, but not all of them. I know.
It's a family affair.
It is a family affair. David, how are you? You're right down in the Cape. How's the Cape going? You're on mute at the moment. No, you're not. You're off now. Good.
We don't know what the weather is.
Yeah. And Alistair, we're doing fine here. And of course, we're approaching summer. We're sort of well into spring and the evenings are getting longer.
Yeah.
So eat your heart out is about what I can say.
We'll get on a very expensive plane and go to wherever it is. That's very good. Look, I think we've done jolly well. It's now sort of nudging towards 8 o'clock, so we're beginning to wrap up. Does anybody else want to sort of join in, say, wave hi, or put an idea in, whatever? I think.
Alistair, if I may just say, I've got to go and get my seagoing togs on. So if I may, I'll just say good night to everybody. Thank you so much. A joy as always to meet you all. And I look forward to seeing some of you in person somewhere along the line. I hope our paths cross.
We'll make it so, John. We'll be in touch with you very shortly.
We thank you, John.
Thank you so much for a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.
Great.
Everybody enjoy October 31st. Eat for me. I wish I could be there with all of you.
There we are, Holly. It's great to see you anyway. You're looking good.
You're looking good too, all of you.
Thank you. See you next
All
time.
right.
Okay.